From where do you join us this evening, as the moon begins its slow ascent over the sleeping world? Let us journey now, not across a field or through a simple wood, but across the vast currents of time itself, traveling to a place where history sat enthroned upon 7 rolling hills, overlooking 2 great seas, where Europe reluctantly met the mysterious shores of Asia. This is the city once called Byzantium, magnificently renamed for the mighty Constantine, a metropolis known throughout the known world simply as the city, protected by walls that seemed to touch the very heavens and illuminated perpetually by the reflected glory of the purest gold and the unwavering light of divine faith. Imagine standing upon the highest battlement of the ancient defenses as the first tentative rays of dawn pierce the deep eastern sky, striking the famed Theodosian walls, built by mortal hands, yet protected, it was often whispered, by a special measure of divine grace. These triple lines of defense, stretching in an immense arc across the vulnerable Thracian plain, were not merely brick and mortar laid by masons, but a profound, enduring promise etched in stone, safeguarding the very heart of Christian civilization against the unending tides of barbarians, restless ambition, and pagan hordes. Below, the vital, deep waters of the Bosphorus surged and swirled, an eternal current carrying ships heavily laden with precious spices from the distant Indies, silken thread from faraway China, and valuable furs from the northern forests, all flowing inevitably into the secure, immense harbor, known by its gleaming, evocative name, the Golden Horn. Even before the populace fully stirred and the official business of the day began, a deep, pervasive spiritual hum would rise from the depths of the sprawling urban tapestry, a sound unlike the clatter of marketplace carts or the shouts of sailors, but rather the collective breath of deep, sustained faith echoing from 1,000 chapels and ascetic monasteries. This was the omnipresent voice of orthodoxy, a constant, measured rhythm of psalms and liturgical incense that gracefully wove through the narrow, twisting, yet orderly streets, serving as a constant, gentle reminder to every citizen, from the humble beggar seeking alms to the esteemed senator in his marble palace, that the city's ultimate, enduring strength lay not just in its immense reserves of pure gold, but in the unyielding, sacrificial devotion to the holy wisdom of God. The massive brass bells of the Hagia Sophia, the great church, would toll out the sacred hours, marking the precise passage of life, prayer, and liturgy, a sound so profound and deeply resonant that it seemed capable of shaking the very foundations of the earth and stirring the souls of the faithful into deeper spiritual awareness. At the very spiritual and temporal nexus of this divinely protected city resided the basileus, the emperor, perpetually cloaked in the deep, costly purple dye extracted from Phoenician murex shells, a color reserved only for him and the holiest icons that decorated the churches, profoundly signifying his unique role not merely as a ruler of men and armies, but as God's anointed vicar and steward on earth, the chosen embodiment of celestial order and earthly justice. When he processed along the May, the magnificent central avenue paved entirely with gleaming marble and lined with towering columns, his presence was a blinding spectacle of immense temporal power and profound piety, always surrounded by the silent, meticulously organized imperial guard, their bronze armor polished to mirror the sunlight and the imperial standards. His imperial edicts governed not only the mundane, necessary matters of foreign trade, internal taxes, and military deployment, but also the most intricate, complex theological disputes, ensuring that political authority and revealed spiritual truth remained inextricably bound and unified in this glorious, singular realm. Ah, the gold! The celebrated source of the city's worldly and enduring fame, which flowed into the secure chambers of the city like a great, unstoppable river seeking the sea, collected diligently through shrewd and precise taxation, strategically managed tariffs, and monopolistic imperial control over vital international lifelines such as the silk routes and the crucial grain supplies arriving from fertile Egypt. The nomisma, the gold coin meticulously struck in the imperial mint with the emperor's steadfast image and the cross of Christ, was internationally renowned for its unwavering purity and its unchanging, reliable weight. Trusted without question from the humid sands of the Levant to the frozen steppes beyond the Danube, sustaining the very fabric of international commerce for a remarkable 1,000 years without once faltering in value or trust. Merchants from countless distant lands, the Rus, the Arabs, the proud Venetians, and the Armenians would stand awestruck and humbled by the unparalleled riches openly displayed in the forums and the bustling markets, where exotic silks shimmered like captured rainbows, imported jewels glowed with an inner captivating fire, and coffers overflowed with precious metals, all testifying to the city's profound, unparalleled, and enduring prosperity. Yet, amidst all the temporal, fleeting glory and the overwhelming display of earthly wealth, nothing, absolutely nothing, could compare to the overwhelming spiritual and architectural majesty of the Hagia Sophia, the dedicated church of the Holy Wisdom. Its great, impossibly vast dome, suspended seemingly not by conventional stone, mortar, and human ingenuity, but by a miraculous, unseen chain of pure gold let down directly from the heavens themselves. When the powerful morning sun streamed through the precisely aligned 40-arched windows encircling the base of the dome, the harsh physical light dissolved into an ethereal golden haze, bathing the colossal interior and the glittering mosaics in molten, moving radiance, instantaneously creating an atmosphere where mortal man felt impossibly close to the divine, where the veil between the earth and the firmament seemed thinned to nothingness. The immense, cavernous space, held aloft by monolithic columns salvaged from ancient pagan temples across the empire, whispered profound, silent stories of conversion, transformation, and ultimate victory, serving as a powerful, silent sermon that utterly captivated and humbled every pilgrim, visitor, and priest who dared to step across its sacred threshold and gaze upward in awe. Though their spiritual devotion was universally steadfast and formally structured, the vibrant citizens of Constantinople were also keenly aware of the joys, fierce rivalries, and tumultuous spectacles of earthly existence, finding immense release and passionate expression in the immense circus, the hippodrome, a colossal structure which could comfortably seat tens of thousands beneath the watchful, judging gaze of the elevated imperial box. Here, the great, colorful factions of the blues and the greens clashed not with sharp, lethal swords or political treatises, but with fervent, deafening shouts, passionate loyalties, and complex political maneuvering centered entirely around the speed and grace of their prized chariots, instantly turning a simple, swift race into a tumultuous, high-stakes expression of civic identity and often violent loyalty. The sustained noise within the hippodrome during a race was absolutely deafening, a volatile, exhilarating stark contrast to the quiet, solemn reverence of the imperial churches. Yet both extremes were recognized as vital, necessary pulses in the enormous, complex, beating heart of the city, perfectly demonstrating the structured, yet occasionally anarchic, nature of sophisticated Byzantine life. While much of the Western world struggled through the profound darkness and fragmentation following the dissolution of the ancient empire, Byzantium remained a luminous, steadfast beacon of meticulous learning and high civilization, diligently guarding the precious scrolls and accumulated wisdom of 1,000 years, safely housed within its great imperial libraries, where countless diligent scribes labored endlessly by the flickering light of oil lamps, their hands moving with disciplined grace. Scholars devoted their disciplined lives to translating, commenting upon, and meticulously preserving the vital texts of the ancient Greeks, the profound philosophical insights of Plato, the logical systems of Aristotle, and the mathematical geometry of Euclid, ensuring that the sacred fire of human reason and rational philosophy would never be extinguished by the enveloping chaos that persistently surrounded the empire. This steadfast, unwavering dedication to knowledge and intellectual preservation was viewed not as a mere luxury or hobby, but as a crucial, sacred duty, the necessary intellectual foundation required for maintaining the sophisticated administration, the intricate diplomacy, and the complex theological unity that kept the great empire flourishing and dominant when so many other kingdoms crumbled quickly into irrelevance and dust. Yet even the city of gold, the supposed jewel of the world, was not immune to the deep shadows cast inevitably by human frailty, relentless ambition, and the corrupting nature of absolute power. And behind the dazzling golden mosaics and the stately rhythmic processions, the serpentine, deadly dance of palace intrigue was an ever-present, chilling reality, constantly swirling around the silent, watchful courtiers and the ever-present eunuchs. These powerful, often unseen figures held immense formal power and vast influence over the emperor's ear. Whispers of plots traveled faster than any official imperial messenger could ride, and the chilling threat of sudden, irreversible dismissal, ruinous exile, or the blinding knife used to remove potential rivals was a constant, stark reminder that high office within the court demanded perpetual, excruciating vigilance and absolute, unquestioning loyalty to the throne. The seat of the emperor was both the shimmering apex of earthly glory and the precise center of profound mortal danger, relentlessly forcing the rulers to navigate a deadly, subtle labyrinth of plots hatched not only in foreign capitals, but also in the deep, cool chambers beneath the great palace itself, where the purifying light of the sun seldom, if ever, penetrated. For countless generations, stretching across a full millennium, this monumental, defiant city stood as the impenetrable, vital barrier between the rising, turbulent forces of the nomadic East and the politically fragmented, struggling kingdoms of the West. A glorious, enduring testament to political continuity, organizational resilience, and military might in a world constantly reshaped and threatened by external violence and internal change. It was a singular place where history was not just passively remembered and archived, but was actively lived, made, and defended daily by every soldier and statesman. A colossal fortress constructed of both stone and spirit, whose very existence proudly proclaimed the enduring, saving power of unified Christian faith and unparalleled, strategically managed wealth. And so, as the distant stars now fully appear above our own resting places, casting their serene silver light, we peacefully leave the shimmering, invincible walls of Constantinople, carrying the faint, rhythmic echo of its golden bells deep within our memory, quietly reflecting on the deep, sustaining peace of its steadfast devotion and the enduring mystery of its eternal fame. The intricate, high diplomacy conducted from the imperial chambers ensured that wars were often won not upon muddy battlefields with the clash of steel, but within the confines of sumptuous, silk-lined halls, through carefully chosen words, strategic gifts of gold, and the subtle manipulation of barbarian alliances, demonstrating a profound faith in intellect over brute force. The imperial bureaucracy, complex and ancient, functioned like the most finely crafted clockwork mechanism, its gears oiled by centuries of precedent and absolute adherence to strict procedure, ensuring that taxes were collected efficiently, laws were dispensed consistently, and the vast military machine was fed, paid, and organized, even when the emperor himself was far away on campaign. This commitment to organized, enduring statecraft allowed the empire to survive catastrophic losses that would have instantly shattered any other kingdom, showcasing the deep-seated Roman belief that the state, not the individual ruler, was the eternal entity deserving of ultimate loyalty. The spiritual life of the city was further enriched by the constant flow of relics, pieces of the true cross, bones of apostles, and garments touched by the saints, each acquisition treated as a strategic victory, enhancing the city's protective sanctity and drawing countless pilgrims who sought healing and blessing. These holy objects were displayed with breathtaking reverence, housed in reliquaries crafted by the finest goldsmiths, emphasizing the material manifestation of divine grace and reinforcing the belief that Constantinople was indeed the new Jerusalem, the physical anchor of God's kingdom on earth. The sheer density of sacred sites meant that no matter where a person walked within the walls, they were always within earshot of a bell tower or the sight of an icon painted by a master artist, keeping the spiritual consciousness of the populace perpetually engaged and focused on the path to salvation. Consider the Great Palace itself, a sprawling, mysterious complex that grew and changed over 1,000 years, a physical manifestation of imperial ambition, containing not just halls of governance, but elaborate gardens, chapels, specialized workshops, private harbors, and the infamous throne room where mechanical golden lions roared and birds sang to impress and intimidate foreign ambassadors. The protocol observed within these halls was so rigid and complex that foreign dignitaries often found themselves entirely overwhelmed, deliberately disoriented by the dazzling excess and the layered formalities designed to elevate the emperor far above the common mortal plane. Every bow, every gesture, and every word spoken carried profound symbolic meaning, turning simple political interaction into a highly choreographed ritual of submission and imperial might. The citizens, known as the Romii, the true Romans, maintained a fierce pride in their heritage, despite speaking Greek and living 1,000 miles from the Tiber, viewing themselves as the sole inheritors of classical civilization, defenders against all forms of ignorance and heresy. This historical continuity provided a powerful cultural glue, binding together diverse peoples under a shared banner of faith and law, allowing Armenian generals, Syrian merchants, and Slavic soldiers to all serve under the same Golden Eagle standard. Their collective identity was reinforced by the constant retelling of legendary battles, the celebrations of imperial triumphs, and the deep communal understanding that they held the line, the final sacred defense against the inevitable tide of history that threatened to wash away the light of civilization. Even the textiles of the city spoke of its unique power, particularly the imperial silk, the production of which was a closely guarded state secret, originally smuggled from the Far East in hollowed-out staffs by clever monks, granting the empire a monopoly on the most luxurious, coveted fabric in the world. The silk workshops, monitored directly by the palace, produced robes and liturgical vestments woven with threads of pure gold, shimmering depictions of Christ Pantocrator, and intricate patterns of eternal vines, serving as soft yet powerful symbols of economic control and religious purity. To wear Byzantine silk, whether in Paris or Baghdad, was instantly recognized as a statement of immense wealth, high status, and a connection, however distant, to the dazzling, inexhaustible source of global luxury residing behind the formidable walls. When night truly descended upon the city, the transition was not into a featureless void, but into a different kind of shimmering grandeur, with countless oil lamps and wax tapers illuminating the main avenues and the great churches, making the metropolis visible as a radiant beacon of organized light even from ships far out in the turbulent Marmara Sea. The watchful eyes of the military patrols moved silently through the residential districts, ensuring safety and order, a quiet reminder of the constant vigilance necessary to preserve this miracle of urban life, allowing the citizens to rest securely under the protection of both the emperor's legions and the benevolent gaze of the Mother of God, whose icon was revered as the city's greatest, most powerful defender. This sense of protected stillness, contrasting sharply with the chaotic dangers lurking beyond the triple walls, was the ultimate luxury bestowed by the gold and the faith. The schools of jurisprudence and law in Constantinople maintained the strict, formalized structure inherited from the great Justinian, ensuring that the vast body of Roman law, the corpus juris civilis, was diligently taught, debated, and applied with meticulous precision, providing a framework of order that unified the diverse provinces of the sprawling empire. This commitment to the rule of written law, rather than the arbitrary whim of feudal lords, was perhaps the greatest, most enduring philosophical achievement of the Byzantine state, providing predictability and justice, and serving as the foundational rock upon which the entire complex administrative structure was built, demonstrating that true governance relied ultimately on rational principles guided by faith, not merely on the transient power of the sword. And so, as the deep silence of the night envelops us fully, and the air cools over the world, we let the golden image of that unvanquished city fade from our mind's eye, carrying only the impression of strength, beauty, and that rhythmic, measured pace of a civilization that understood the profound, difficult balance required to hold both earthly splendor and heavenly devotion in a single, masterful, thousand-year grasp. May your rest be as secure as the sleep of a Byzantine citizen behind the mighty Theodosian walls, guarded by the grace of God and the certainty of enduring justice. The intricate, subtle art of mosaic was perhaps the most characteristic expression of this imperial faith, where tiny, meticulously placed tesserae of colored glass and gold leaf were set into wet plaster to create monumental, glowing images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the long line of sainted emperors and empresses, making the walls of the churches and palaces shimmer with an otherworldly light. These shimmering images were not merely decorations, but theological statements designed to catch the light and create the impression that the divine figures were floating just beyond the realm of physical reality, bridging the gap between the earthly viewer and the transcendent spiritual kingdom they represented. The gold tesserae, used abundantly and without restraint, represented the uncorruptible nature of the heavenly realm, literally bringing the promised city of light down to earth within the very fabric of the imperial structures. The vast imperial coinage served not just as a tool of commerce, but as a potent propaganda mechanism, carrying the carefully managed image of the reigning Basileus and the inscription of the Christian cross to the furthest reaches of the trading world, silently proclaiming the legitimacy and the piety of the ruler to every individual who held the coin in their palm. The consistency of the numisma over centuries represented the stability of the entire political and economic structure, assuring allies and intimidating enemies with the physical presence of Byzantine wealth and permanence, demonstrating that the power of the city was not a passing phenomenon, but a bedrock of global reality. This metallic consistency became a symbol of trust few other states in history could ever rival. Even the imperial gardens, such as those that flowed down to the Marmara Sea from the Great Palace, were carefully cultivated not merely for leisure, but as deliberate reflections of paradise on earth, featuring exotic plants, sculpted hedges, and flowing fountains, often designed around geometrically perfect patterns that symbolized the celestial order and harmony governed by the emperor. These quiet, fragrant spaces provided a necessary contrast to the harsh realities of palace politics and constant warfare, offering a momentary, controlled escape into an idealized vision of nature tamed and perfected under imperial supervision, reminding the ruler of the divine mandate to bring order to all creation, both natural and political. The sophisticated use of Greek fire, a mysterious, water-ignited incendiary weapon launched by specialized bronze siphons from dromons, swift, twin-masted warships, ensured the absolute naval supremacy of the empire for centuries, protecting the vulnerable seawalls and controlling the vital access through the straits. This secret technology, guarded more fiercely than the location of the imperial gold reserves, gave the city a profound military advantage, especially during crucial sieges, as the sight of flame burning fiercely atop the waves often broke the morale of enemy fleets before they could even approach the massive harbor chains of the Golden Horn. The very existence of this fiery weapon added a layer of near-mythological protection to the already formidable defenses. Thus, the story of Byzantium is not simply a narrative of a place, but an enduring meditation on the profound human endeavor to marry the sacred with the practical, the philosophical pursuit of eternal truth with the difficult, fleeting reality of temporal power, all encapsulated within a monumental structure of stone, gold, and prayer. It stands forever as a testament to what sustained faith, combined with relentless strategic wisdom, can achieve when focused upon a single, divinely favored location at the very heart of the world. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening, seeking peace and ancient wisdom? Yet, to truly understand the pulse of the city, one must look toward the Great Palace, where the emperor, the Basileus, did not merely rule men, but held the sacred role of God's vice-regent on earth, orchestrating the entire empire according to the principle of taxis, the divine order mirrored in terrestrial hierarchy. When foreign envoys were admitted to the throne room, they often found themselves paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming spectacle of synthesized power and piety, walking across floors paved with precious marbles, moving beneath domes gilded with shimmering representations of celestial beings, all designed to humble the visitor immediately. The famous hydraulic golden lion statues and the mechanical golden birds, which sang and roared upon command, were not mere toys, but calculated theological statements, demonstrating the emperor's near supernatural command over both artifice and nature, solidifying his position as the chosen shepherd of the Christian flock and the protector of the true faith. Beneath this dazzling, ritualized surface lay the silent, powerful engine of the Byzantine civil service, a vast network of highly educated eunuchs and learned officials known as the logothetes, who managed everything from the meticulous collection of taxes in distant provinces to the maintenance of the public granaries within the city. These meticulous administrators treated their ledgers and scrolls with the same solemn reverence that a priest afforded his holy texts, understanding implicitly that the uninterrupted flow of precise information was essential for the survival of the sprawling realm against its constant tide of external threats pressing upon every border. This relentless, almost invisible machinery of governance ensured that even during periods of military upheaval or dynastic turmoil, the necessary operations of the state, the payment of the standing army, the delivery of subsidized bread, the repair of the vital aqueducts, continued with minimal interruption, lending the empire its incredible resilience and famed longevity. Stepping outside the hollowed silence of the palace grounds, one immediately encountered the raucous symphony of the Maese, the great central thoroughfare that stretched from the mighty Golden Gate straight toward the imperial residence, acting as the pulsing economic artery of the known world. Here, the odors of exotic spices, cinnamon from Ceylon, pepper from India, and saffron from Anatolia mingled heavily with the sharp scent of raw wool and the brine carried inland from the harbors, creating a sensory overload that spoke directly to the city's profound mastery of world exchange. Merchants from lands as distant as Scandinavia and Nubia haggled over bales of the highly prized, closely guarded Byzantine silks, which shone with dyes so vibrant they seemed spun from captured sunlight, reinforcing the indisputable truth that all roads and all riches ultimately led to the Queen of Cities. The markets were not merely places of transaction, but vast open-air chambers of espionage, where the subtle movement of foreign spies, the whispers of political discontent, and the movements of enemy armies were often detected by the experienced praefectus orbis, the city prefect, whose watchful eye governed all aspects of civil life. The prefect's office held the power to regulate prices, weights, and measures, ensuring fairness and stability within the teeming metropolis, a crucial responsibility that prevented the kind of shortages and rioting that often crippled lesser cities throughout the fragmented Western lands. Thus, the daily exchange of silver and goods was deeply intertwined with the maintenance of internal security, demonstrating once again the Byzantine principle that sound economics and strong governance were inseparable halves of a successful state. Yet, amidst the incessant clatter of commerce and the thunderous roar of the hippodrome, there existed a counterpoint of profound stillness and dedicated intellectual labor, found within the countless monasteries scattered across the hills and nested within the very fabric of the city walls, acting as quiet reservoirs of ancient wisdom. It was in the dim, quiet light of the specialized scriptoria that tireless, devoted monks, often working in bone-chilling cold throughout the long nights, painstakingly copied and illuminated the classical texts of Greece and Rome, ensuring that the fragile legacy of Plato, Aristotle, and the great Roman jurists did not vanish in the face of widespread cultural collapse elsewhere. This devoted scholastic preservation meant that Byzantium was not merely a military and religious power, but the essential, irreplaceable library of Western civilization, holding the precious flame of learning through a millennium of darkness and upheaval, awaiting the moment when the West would be ready once more to receive its inheritance. This preservation extended beyond philosophical treatises to the meticulous copying of complex military manuals, strategic histories, and the authoritative codifications of Roman law, particularly the great collection created by Justinian, which governed every aspect of civilian and military interaction. The preservation of these technical and legal texts allowed the empire to maintain a sophisticated level of institutional memory and operational efficiency unparalleled by any contemporary kingdom, providing the necessary foundation for swift judicial action and the precise, disciplined organization of its formidable armies and fleets. The very act of copying these ancient, difficult texts was seen as a holy duty, recognizing that the continuation of Roman order was synonymous with the continuation of Christian truth in a hostile world. The most physical and perhaps most comforting manifestation of the city's protective genius remained the legendary triple line of the Theodosian walls, a monumental achievement of engineering that stretched for miles across the peninsula, designed to withstand virtually any siege force the terrestrial world could conceivably muster. This defensive system consisted not of a single barrier, but an ingenious layered approach. A deep, 50-foot wide, often wet, moat, followed by a low outer wall, and finally the colossal inner rampart studded with nearly 100 immense 60-foot towers, each precisely positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire and mutual support. These consecrated walls were held together not only by mortar and stone, but also by holy icons and deeply rooted crosses embedded within their structures, reinforcing the deep-seated belief that the Mother of God herself stood eternally sentinel over her favored city, rendering the seemingly impregnable defenses also supernaturally fortified. Maintenance of this unparalleled protective shell was an endless, draining endeavor, requiring vast portions of the imperial treasury and the conscripted labor of thousands of citizens, who understood intimately the sacred, generational duty of keeping the ramparts whole and ever ready for the next inevitable assault from the Persians, the Avars, or the shifting tribes from the northern steppes. The emperors, therefore, carried a singular and heavy burden, knowing that their strategic choices, their success in intricate diplomacy, and the very financial health of the realm were all ultimately tested against the integrity of these very stones, which represented the final, thin yet mighty barrier between Christian order and utter engulfing chaos. Every emperor knew in his heart that should the Theodosian walls ever truly fail, the golden light of Roman civilization, which had burned so brightly and so long, would be utterly extinguished beneath the weight of invaders, transforming the Queen of Cities into silent ash and scattering its precious heritage to the unpitying winds of time. Beyond the landward defenses, the harbor of the Golden Horn presented its own unique strategic challenges and safeguards, protected by the massive iron boom chain which was raised in times of peril, stretching across the narrow inlet to deny entry to hostile fleets seeking to bypass the dangerous currents of the Bosporus. This chain, made of links so thick they required dozens of men to maneuver, provided a final mechanical seal on the city's most vulnerable waterfront, allowing the specialized naval fleet, the dromons, armed with their fearsome Greek fire, to concentrate their terrifying defense at the points of maximum enemy exposure. The ability to lock down the Golden Horn ensured that the city's vast network of warehouses and provisioning points remained secure, allowing Constantinople to sustain its vast population even when completely surrounded by hostile forces for years at a time. The complex, multi-layered identity of the Byzantine citizen was forged in this constant tension between heavenly aspiration and earthly necessity, a life lived forever under the shadow of great threat, yet warmed by the certainty of divine favor and the incomparable grandeur of their surroundings. They considered themselves not simply the residents of a great city, but the last true heirs of Rome, charged with the holiest of tasks, the defense and propagation of Orthodox Christianity, a duty far greater than any mere national allegiance. This profound sense of purpose infused their artwork, their political maneuvering, and their unwavering resilience, providing the psychological foundation that enabled them to survive onslaughts that would have utterly crushed lesser empires throughout history. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening as we speak of the great city known to all as Constantinople? The core of this enduring identity, which allowed the city to stand for so long, rested upon the sacred figure of the emperor, who was much more than a mere earthly sovereign. He was considered God's appointed regent on earth, the living icon of Christ's rule, and the very embodiment of the Roman oikoumene, the civilized Christian world. His movements within the sprawling sacred geography of the city were accompanied by elaborate sacred ceremonies designed not just to impress visiting potentates, but specifically to elevate him above the mundane realm, ensuring that every public appearance became a liturgical event demonstrating the perfect harmony between the heavenly court and the imperial rule below. The imperial palace, a labyrinth of chambers known as the Great Palace stretching down to the sea, with its echoing halls and silent golden mosaics, served as the immutable epicenter of this holy governance, a place where statecraft was fundamentally indistinguishable from sacred duty, solidifying the idea that their political structure was utterly ordained and immutable. From the moment of his acclamation in the Hippodrome to the solemn reception of foreign ambassadors, the emperor moved through a carefully curated landscape of awe, his every action designed to reflect the eternal order of the cosmos. Yet, the true spiritual beating heart of the city and the deepest wellspring of the empire's soul lay within the towering, incomparable dome of the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, a structure so vast and ethereal that its very existence seemed to defy physical laws and perpetually overwhelmed the human spirit upon first entrance. Stepping across its massive bronze threshold was akin to traversing the veil between heaven and earth, as the light, filtered through 40 strategically placed windows at the dome's base, seemed to dissolve the massive weight of the stone walls, creating an ethereal golden cascade that suspended the great central dome seemingly by sheer divine will alone. Here, amidst the glimmering gold of the unseen mosaics high in the vaults and the profound silence punctuated only by the soaring chant of the liturgy, the common citizen and the highest patriarch experienced a visceral, immediate manifestation of God's overwhelming glory, reinforcing the cherished belief that Constantinople was indeed the divinely protected New Jerusalem promised in the Holy Scriptures. The sheer scale, the intricate geometry, and the architectural perfection of its construction stood as the ultimate physical proof of the empire's unparalleled theological and technical sophistication, humbling all who stood beneath its perfect, vast canopy. For the ordinary citizen dwelling in the shadows of these monuments, life was structured not by clock time, but by the immutable, comforting rhythms of the church calendar, where every day offered a solemn remembrance or a vibrant saint's feast that meticulously wove the sacred history of the faith into the immediate fabric of the present moment. Great religious processions winding through the Mez, the wide, celebrated central street of the capital, often carried priceless relics, a fragment of the true cross believed to have been recovered centuries prior, the revered mantle of the Virgin Mary, or the sanctified hand of a martyr, turning the urban landscape into a vast outdoor sanctuary where the divine literally touched the pedestrian path. This constant, vivid immersion in the miraculous and the historical provided a powerful and unwavering moral compass, guiding actions both large and small, and cultivating a deep, almost familial relationship with the saints who were viewed not as distant figures, but as active, intervening participants in the daily life and defense of the city. Even the simplest act of lighting a taper before a familiar icon in a small street chapel became a profound personal affirmation of the great cosmic order maintained and upheld by the Orthodox Empire. Beyond the immediate confines of the palace and the colossal churches, the extensive network of monasteries served as vital reservoirs of intellectual life, diligently protecting the philosophical inheritance of the ancient world alongside the rigorous theological advancements made by the Church Fathers. Monks labored ceaselessly in the cold quiet of the scriptoriums, meticulously preserving texts not only from the Gospels and patristic commentaries, but also priceless works from Plato, Archimedes, and Aristotle, thereby ensuring that the clear light of classical learning was never fully extinguished during the long, tumultuous Dark Ages that enveloped the Latin West to the exclusion of higher thought. These contemplative centers, such as the influential monastery of Studios, were far from isolated retreats. They were intimately connected to the city's complex university system, providing a steady and disciplined stream of highly educated administrators, jurists, and diplomats essential for governing an empire that relied as heavily on complex, codified Roman law as it did upon sheer military strength. The disciplined Byzantine mind thus fostered a unique and powerful synthesis where rigorous classical logic and profound, unshakable piety were not viewed as adversaries, but rather as necessary companions in the dedicated, lifelong pursuit of holy wisdom. This magnificent spiritual and intellectual edifice, however, was fundamentally underpinned and financed by an economic engine of unparalleled sophistication, fueled primarily by the strategic geographical location of Constantinople, which made it the inescapable nexus of trade routes stretching all the way from the frozen Baltic Sea to the exotic spice ports of the Indian Ocean. The city operated under a strict, centralized regulatory system, overseen by the state guilds and magistrates, a complex structure that controlled everything from the regulated weight of the daily loaf of bread to the controlled price of foreign furs, thus ensuring internal economic stability and maintaining the crucial imperial monopoly over essential luxury commodities, chief among them being the prized silkworm industry smuggled long ago from the distant East. The creation of the high imperial silks, woven with thread dyed in the extraordinarily rich, deep Tyrian purple that was strictly reserved only for the emperor and his immediate family, represented not only a source of vast wealth, but also a potent political symbol to the world, demonstrating that the very finest and most desired luxuries of the world originated under the shadow of the Holy Cross in their capital. Merchants, traveling from the trading centers of Venice, the harbors of Amalfi, and the wild lands of Rus, found themselves drawn inexorably to the Golden Horn, where they exchanged hard currency and exotic raw goods for the stable gold coinage, the solidus, whose purity remained absolutely undisputed for over 1,000 years, a shining testament to Byzantium's unwavering fiscal integrity and the longevity of its dominion. Yet, this constant splendor and economic superiority were never allowed to become static, existing instead in a constant, dynamic state of flux, frequently punctuated by periods of profound cultural and military flowering, such as the lauded Macedonian Renaissance, and terrible, terrifying moments of existential crisis that tested the deep faith of its residents to the very breaking point. The frequent, grueling sieges that battered the Theodosian walls, the devastating earthquakes that rattled the great dome of the Hagia Sophia, and the brutal internal struggles for the imperial throne served only to reinforce the fundamental Byzantine worldview that true, lasting peace was not to be found on this earthly temporary plane, but only through relentless spiritual devotion, constant military vigilance, and absolute obedience to divine law. Whenever catastrophe struck, whether the assault of a foreign army or the devastation of a fire that consumed entire districts, the populace would turn instantly and collectively to their chosen heavenly protectors, most especially to the Virgin Mary, whose sacred relic of the Maphorion, her veil, was often solemnly paraded upon the walls during periods of great siege. Believing with unwavering faith that only divine intervention could possibly lift the siege or mend the broken cisterns of their city. This perpetual cycle of glory and subsequent tribulation forged a deep, resilient fatalism within the Byzantine character, a resignation tempered by the absolute, fierce conviction that the city of God would ultimately prevail against the forces of darkness and chaos surrounding it on all sides, until the end of time itself. Yet, even in times of peace, the Byzantine court never rested in its efforts to project an image of incomparable power and divine favor, using diplomacy less as a tool of negotiation and more as a mesmerizing performance designed to overawe and subdue potential rivals without the cost of warfare. Foreign ambassadors arriving in Constantinople were subjected to a meticulously choreographed sequence of psychological maneuvers, beginning with weeks of waiting and culminating in a presentation within the great palace's most famous room, the throne room of the Magnuora. Here, the envoys would observe the emperor seated upon a mechanized throne that could suddenly rise toward the ceiling, flanked by roaring golden lions and gilded automata birds that sang mechanized songs, all designed to portray the emperor as an untouchable, semi-divine being whose power transcended earthly limitations. This spectacular use of highly advanced mechanics and overwhelming gold spectacle was often far more effective than an army of soldiers, convincing even the most hardened foreign dignitaries of the utter futility of raising arms against a civilization so demonstrably blessed by both heavenly and earthly ingenuity. This careful cultivation of both spiritual certainty and material opulence led to an unparalleled flourishing of art and craftsmanship, a tradition rooted in the belief that the physical beauty of the icons and mosaics should reflect the spiritual perfection of the heavenly realms they represented. The icon painter was not merely an artist, but a conduit, laboring in humble silence and often prayer, adhering strictly to established sacred formulas to ensure that the image produced possessed the necessary spiritual immediacy to facilitate true communion with the saint or holy figure depicted. The gold utilized in these icons and in the vast domes was not chosen for its mere monetary value alone, but because it reflected light without tarnishing or fading, symbolizing the eternal, uncorruptible nature of the divine, serving as a material echo of the heavenly Jerusalem. Thus, every piece of craftsmanship, from the delicate carving of a processional cross to the massive mosaic image of the Pantocrator gazing down from the dome of a church, was a devotional act and a powerful statement of imperial theological authority, solidifying the city's reputation as a treasury of sacred beauty unequaled anywhere else in the known world. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The heart of this terrestrial manifestation of divine order resided within the vast, sprawling complex known simply as the Great Palace, a labyrinth of marble courts, gilded halls, and private gardens that dominated the eastern promontory overlooking the Sea of Marmara. Within its walls, every interaction, every procession, and every official audience was choreographed with excruciating precision, transforming governance itself into a sustained theological opera intended to elevate the emperor far above the common sphere of mortality and link him inextricably to God's own vice-regency. Foreign ambassadors who entered the throne room, the famed magnaura, were often subjected to elaborate mechanical marvels designed to enforce awe, witnessing gilded bronze lions that roared and mechanical golden trees whose branches sheltered jeweled birds that sang, demonstrating the emperor's mastery not just of men, but of the very laws of nature and ingenuity, creating an atmosphere of unsettling, supernatural power. Yet, the authority of the emperor was not solely sustained by glittering spectacle and mechanical theater. It was woven deeply into the fabric of daily life through an exhaustive and meticulously maintained system of imperial law, understood by all citizens as the tangible expression of Christ's just rule on earth. This codified righteousness ensured a degree of civic order and bureaucratic sophistication unmatched since the height of ancient Rome, regulating everything from maritime trade and contractual obligations to the specific colors of silk permitted to each social class, thereby fixing the social hierarchy with permanent, visible markers. The underlying spiritual conviction was that a well-ordered state was inherently a holy state, and therefore obedience to the law was not merely a civic duty but a profound act of piety, securing both earthly prosperity and celestial reward under the watchful gaze of the imperial magistrates. Flowing through the vast metropolis like a central river was the great thoroughfare known as the Messe, or Middle Street, starting from the Golden Gate and culminating in the Imperial Forums, a ceaseless conduit of humanity and commerce where all the wealth of the world seemed to converge. Along this paved artery moved not just the imperial retinues, but also merchant caravans laden with exotic spices from the Indies, rare silks from distant Serica, and raw materials shipped across the Black Sea, all funneling into the regulated markets and guild halls nestled near the harbor of the Golden Horn. This incredible centralization of global trade meant that the city itself acted as the world's treasury and clearinghouse, demanding custom duties and tolls that continuously replenished the imperial coffers, thereby sustaining the costly magnificence of the churches and the vast standing army alike. The administration of this immense economic and legal machine relied upon a highly educated, often rigidly hierarchical bureaucracy, composed of officials whose primary loyalty was directed toward the sacred institution of the purple-clad emperor, the living law of the city. These court eunuchs and meticulous secretaries maintained ledgers detailing every ounce of gold, every bale of goods, and every decree issued, forming an intricate, silent network of service that ensured the continued stability of the empire even when emperors themselves were weak or short-lived. To rise within this administrative structure required not only fierce intellectual prowess, but also an unwavering commitment to theological orthodoxy, ensuring that the state served as a perfectly honed instrument for the propagation and protection of the true faith. Amidst the cacophony of the markets and the solemn grandeur of the imperial rituals, there existed a vital counterpoint: the widespread and highly respected monastic communities, built both within the city walls and scattered across the hills of the surrounding countryside. These houses of silence were not retreats from society, but essential spiritual engines, serving as centers of deep prayer and rigorous theological scholarship that often defined the accepted orthodox doctrine of the entire civilized world. Here, the pursuit of wisdom was considered as high a devotional act as the painting of an icon, and the careful copying of a Greek philosophical treatise or a gospel text ensured the intellectual continuity of 1,000 years, making the libraries of Constantinople the unchallenged repository of Hellenic and Christian knowledge. The monks, whose humble, ash-colored robes stood in stark contrast to the brilliant silks of the court, held immense spiritual sway over the populace, providing spiritual guidance and sometimes challenging the excesses of imperial power when doctrine was perceived to be endangered. Their ascetic discipline reminded the opulent citizens that true wealth lay not in fading gold, but in the eternal treasures of the soul, a necessary moral anchor in a capital city famed for its luxury and earthly temptation. They were the constant, whispered conscience of the city, ensuring that the material world remained subservient to the higher spiritual truths embodied in the great domes and glittering icons. The relationship between the racing factions and the throne was complex and often dangerous, capable of igniting devastating riots that could threaten the very stability of the regime, as famously demonstrated by the terrifying Nika revolt that nearly destroyed the city centuries before. Thus, the emperor and his strategists had to be masters of populist appeasement, ensuring that the citizens were sufficiently fed with cheap grain and entertained by these grand spectacles to prevent their discontent from turning into open rebellion against the divinely sanctioned ruler. The ability to manage the fervor of the hippodrome was often as critical to survival as the command of the imperial legions stationed far on the eastern frontier. Surrounding this entire nexus of faith, law, and gold stood the colossal and legendary Theodosian walls, a triple layer of stone, towers, and ditches stretching across the western landward approach, often hailed as the greatest defensive barrier built by man in the whole of antiquity. These walls were not simply inert fortifications, they were living monuments to imperial resolve and engineering brilliance, regularly maintained and constantly guarded by vigilant troops who understood their duty as the sacred protection of the very heart of Christian civilization from the ravages of the pagan world. The citizens slept soundly, generation after generation, knowing that this massive girdle of stone, coupled with the formidable imperial navy patrolling the straits, rendered their city virtually impregnable, confirming the prophecy that Constantinople would stand so long as the Orthodox faith remained pure and the vigilance of its defenders did not falter. Yet, this golden sanctuary was never truly secure, for the wealth and brilliance of Byzantium acted as an irresistible magnet, drawing the envy and hostile ambition of every power that arose along its borders, whether the aggressive Sassanid Persians in the east, the swift Arab armies bearing the banner of the new Crescent faith, or the unpredictable horse-riding tribes sweeping in from the northern steppes and the Danube. The maintenance of the imperial defense, the elaborate diplomatic gifting required to soothe potential enemies, and the sheer administrative burden of ruling a sprawling multi-ethnic empire consumed staggering volumes of resources, placing immense pressure upon the system of taxation and global trade. This constant existential pressure demanded an almost superhuman degree of organization and financial acumen from the ministers and officials of the palace, ensuring that the light of the city did not flicker out, even in the darkest decades of invasion and siege that inevitably followed one another. The defense of the city was therefore a continuous devotional exercise, relying as much on miraculous interventions and the protection of the Holy Mother of God, whose relic cloak was paraded along the ramparts during every siege, as it did on the strength of the mortar and the skill of the imperial engineers. It was understood that the gold of the treasury was fundamentally a tool for survival, not merely for vanity, funding the intricate web of espionage, diplomacy, and mercenary armies necessary to keep the wolves baying just beyond the impregnable stone perimeter. The city was thus a fortress built of faith and stone, its destiny inextricably linked to its theological resilience in the face of a hostile and unforgiving world. The very air of Constantinople, rich with the smell of incense, exotic oils, and salt spray from the harbor, carried the weight of history and the promise of eternity, setting it apart from all other settlements across the face of the earth. Its citizens, who called themselves Romaioi, Romans, maintained a deep, almost mystical connection to their ancient heritage, believing themselves to be the last true inheritors of both classical learning and the apostolic faith, holding the torch of civilization steady against the encroaching night of barbarism. The city was not merely a political capital. It was the sacred custodian of global order, and the defense of its streets and domes was nothing less than the defense of humanity itself, a perpetual, heavy burden that they carried with unparalleled pride and enduring vigilance. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The sacred palace, rising high above the shore where the waters of the Marmara met the Golden Horn, stood as the physical manifestation of this divine obligation, a labyrinth of marble halls, porphyry chambers, and hidden gardens that stretched across the easternmost point of the peninsula. Here, the Basileus, the anointed emperor, performed rituals of unprecedented complexity, designed to reflect the order of the heavens upon the mundane earth, thereby guaranteeing the flow of imperial grace and stability throughout the vast, beleaguered domain. His every appearance was a carefully choreographed spectacle, draped in silk, gold, and pearls, serving as a constant, vivid reminder to both subjects and foreign envoys that this governance was mandated not by mortal choice, but by the eternal will of the Almighty. The very floor tiles of the throne room, glittering beneath the polished bronze light, spoke silently of the 1,000 years of unbroken authority they upheld, symbolizing the timeless continuum of Roman rule. The life within the palace walls revolved around the silentium, the strict code of court etiquette that dictated everything from the angle of a bow to the precise number of syllables permitted in addressing the sacred personage of the emperor. The officials who served within the bureaucracy, often eunuchs trained from youth in the complex machinery of state, were masters of meticulous record-keeping and subtle influence. ensuring that the heavy weight of imperial decrees was translated into practical action across distant provinces. This administrative structure, honed over centuries and funded by the meticulous collection of taxes and tributes, was the hidden armature upon which the glittering facade of the empire truly rested, a machine of unparalleled efficiency in the late antique world. Foreign rulers were often humbled and bewildered by the sheer scale of the organization, realizing quickly that they faced a power far deeper and more systematic than any barbarian kingdom could muster. Beyond the quiet halls of the sacred palace lay the clamorous arena of the hippodrome, a massive, curving structure capable of seating hundreds of thousands, which served as the true heart of public political expression and communal fervor. It was here, during the thrilling, often dangerous chariot races, that the collective passions of the city found release, organized fiercely around the two great domains, the Blues and the Greens, whose rivalries transcended mere sport to become the major channels for religious debate and municipal grievances. The emperor himself would preside over these spectacles from his elevated box, the kathisma, acutely aware that the roar of the crowd was not just cheering for a victory, but was also a gauge of the loyalty and temper of his populace, requiring careful management lest excitement turn swiftly into sedition. These games were thus essential acts of statecraft, providing a vital outlet for the restless energy of the capital, while simultaneously reaffirming the emperor's visible command over the assembled multitude. Yet the true source of the city's resilience was found not in its courts or its games, but in its absolute mastery of global commerce, facilitated by the strategic location that compelled all sea traffic between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean to pass beneath its watchful walls. The Golden Horn, the deep, sheltered inlet that provided an incomparable harbor, was perpetually choked with ships bearing spices from India, silks from Serica, furs from the northern forests, and grain from Egypt, all contributing to the colossal wealth that flowed into the imperial aerarium. Every transaction was monitored, weighed, and taxed, providing the constant stream of gold that ensured the stability of the famous nomisma, the Byzantine gold coin, whose purity and reliability were trusted across 3 continents, making it the undisputed international currency for nearly 1,000 years. This economic leverage was a silent, potent weapon, often far more effective than an army, securing alliances and controlling rivals through dependence upon the city's meticulously organized markets and unfailing standard of value. The spiritual axis of this world was Hagia Sophia, the great church, standing immense and unique upon the highest point of the peninsula, its dome suspended seemingly by divine intervention rather than by mortal construction. Stepping within its cavernous, light-drenched interior was intended to be an immediate and overwhelming experience of the divine presence, forcing mortal comprehension to bow before the sheer scale and luminous mystery of the architecture, which surpassed any known religious structure. The air inside was thick with the scent of age and reverence, illuminated by the thousands of flickering